I hope to tell you what Atlantis was and who was in it. I know there's so many stories out there that it was different races and the Lemurians, etc., etc., but we have to go by the ancient texts. Now, I know I've said this many times before, but the ancient text, hundreds of thousands of these found in the 1800s, and they all have a complete narrative. The brand new text, language that actually has Aramaic, Babylonian, etc., that follow on from that. So we have to agree these are real. So now we know they're real. The Anunnaki actually say in their tablets that they build their cities in circles, which is very interesting because when you go to Plato's description, they're in concentric circles. So the Anunnaki actually also build. Now, the Anunnaki were around when the Atlanteans would have been around. So the Anunnaki never wrote about another alien race whatsoever. So we can only then assume that it was the Anunnaki. Now, there were different factions at this time. So this was the time when Ra was Marduk. Marduk turned into Ra and had issues with Iana. And all these different locations had different factions of groups. Enlil's groups, Enki's groups, and obviously their offsprings ended up creating their own groups, and so there was so many different factions. So what happened is Iana managed to persuade Enlil. Enki agreed, but he thought no one would know where the nuclear weapons were. So if you watch my other videos, you'll see that there was nuclear weapons brought by Alalula when he first arrived. Enlil knew where they were. So anyway, Iana managed to persuade them to try and blow up, Marduk. However, they didn't succeed. But what they did do with the 7 nuclear weapons is wipe out many of these type of locations. And we know that because there's here it says researchers find proof of ancient atomic war. That's in Mesopotamia, in India as well. So we know that there was these atomic explosions, and even the Bible talks about flesh rotting, etc., etc. So we know roughly the time that happened because of researchers, plus obviously the time that the book talks about Iana wanting to attack Ra. So the logic is that it was one of those cities that got destroyed by one of those missiles, rockets, nukes, and it just makes sense. Wow, we now know who the Atlanteans are, thanks to my last video. After 30 years of research, I think I concluded it quite successfully. No one's debunked it. And so the Atlanteans basically were the Aigigi, which were the young Anunnaki, which, if you don't know who the Anunnaki are, please go and watch my videos or do some research. So basically, the Aigigi were warned, along with the other cities that were about to be destroyed, to vacate the cities. Now, the cities that the Anunnaki built are in circles, and that's exactly what Plato said. Now, the Aigigi were Anunnaki, even though they were the younger ones, and they had technology. So when they left and travelled to Egypt, they would then tell their story that their city's just been destroyed, which makes sense. So if you're interested in finding out more, watch the previous video to this, or start from video 1 onwards, because hey, you know the Egyptian god Ra? Well, he was actually Marduk, as you probably already know. And he was, at this time in my videos, I'm doing it in order, but at this time he was being attacked by the rest of the Anunnaki because he was trying to take over the planet. And they used their terror weapons, which was basically some sort of nuclear weapons, which was proof of if you watch my previous videos. And he was lucky because he went to a place called Babili, and the winds from the radiation didn't actually go there. They blew the opposite direction. So he was saved after all of these annihilation of cities. And Enlil and Enki had a meeting, and they said, what's going on? And Enlil said to him, actually, Galzu already told me about this in a dream, told me everything that was going to happen. Enki was like, really? Why didn't you tell us? And Enlil was, well, you know, destiny, this, that and the other. So guess what happens next? Follow and watch. Well, Enlil and Enki had a good discussion about Marduk and the fact that the emissary of the creator of everything supposedly came to Enlil one night and told him what was going to happen in the future, and that future has now happened. at their point in time, and Enlil and Enki were saying, well, if that was meant to be, that was meant to be by the creator of everything. And if that's the case, then Marduk has to be given the rulership of Earth. Now, they had these a ranking system where Enlil gave himself 50 points, and Enki was actually only on 30, believe it or not. So they are about to transfer the 50 rank to Marduk. And guess what happens next? Subscribe, follow, watch, like, kiss me, whatever you want to do, just keep watching. This is actually quite sad. So Enlil says to Enki that him and Ninurta, who was actually supposed to be taking over Earth, will not stand in Marduk's way, and they will go across the ocean to where they were mining and continue the mining operations, and will probably never see Enki again, his brother. So Enki, they shake hands, well, wrists, and Enki leaves, and they never see each other again. So Enki goes back to his land in Mesopotamia, the land that he was ruling, which is now going to be ruled by Marduk. And he decides that this history of everything that's happened, including Gaozu and everything, needs to be written down for us in the future to read, for me to read out to you. So the oldest known writing is cuneiform, and we have all the information we need from them. And so the most important writings were transcribed or scribed by Andubsar, who was actually a human in Eridu, and Enki got him to do the most important writing, which is what ended up pretty much in the Bible. So not a lot of people realise that the cuneiform tablets came first. Then the Babylonians translated the cuneiform tablets, and then the Aramaics translated the Babylonian tablets, or writing at this point, some of them were in parchment. And then Hebrew then translated the Aramaic, which is why the Bible has chunks not quite right. And you can actually go back and look at all the other translations, and you can see where they start, as they went on, they kept making mistakes, or adding their own bits of information, which was is not really a language, it's me making it up. But if you was to write a language down and start it from scratch, the chances are that, if a group of you, let's just say a whole city, maybe in Sumeria, all tried to learn the same language and write it down, you would probably end up scribbling over bits, and there's got to be some record of your attempts at making a new language. However, when you go and look at exactly where these first languages came from, Mesopotamia, Egypt, etc., and China, and then eventually China, they were all fully fledged languages. You only get a fully fledged language if a race knows that language already and not making it up as they go along. So there's no evidence whatsoever of part language, it's fully, which means it was a race that knew. The Book of the Dead. Now, I know it kind of sounds like a movie, but there was a Book of the Dead in Egypt that would explain about life after death. Now, I'm moving away from the Anunnaki for a while. Yes, there's so much more I could talk about, but it's how many more videos do I do of them without people getting bored? So I'm just going to move on to Egyptians at the moment, and we'll look at why the Egyptians had mummifications and things like that, whereas some of the other locations that the Anunnaki were at didn't. So it clearly shows there's a difference there, and that's why a lot of people actually think that they were two different races, compared to the Sumerians, for example. But I will hopefully show you that actually it's just a change of ownership that made all of the Egyptians do what they did, and why. So follow, subscribe, whatever you normally do, and enjoy. Yes, it has snowed in Egypt. Now, coming up in my videos, I'm going to be telling you our true history of Egypt, not the stuff you get taught in universities and on TV and stuff like that. And the reason why I say that they're wrong is because, let's just look at this. Pretty much a month doesn't go by without them admitting that their dates are all wrong. So look here, they're talking now about, and this is recent, they're talking about mummies are now actually 1,000 years older than what they believed, which pushes everything back. The dates then push Cleopatra back, etc. So way off. 1,000 years is a humongous amount of time. So if they've got that wrong, then don't listen to mainstream's dates. You've got more chance of me telling you the correct dates by watching and following my videos. Now, here's Mesopotamia, here's Egypt. See, there's a gap there. That's how the Mesopotamians moved into Egypt. And I'm just going to show you one more thing, that this cartouche, which was in the Great Pyramid, has been proven to be fake. So we know the dates are. Are you going to join with me as we learn the true history of Egypt? Not what you're told on schools or in TV. We're going to go and dig deep like I have with the Sumerian and with the Anunnaki. So we need to first go through who the people are, so you get an idea of who the people are, that when I get round to talking about them, you'll know who they are and where they were in time, etc. So the first most important thing is to know that a cartouche, which is what you're looking at there, an oval with a line at the bottom there, represents royalty. Now that's really important because obviously the people that we're going to be talking about are either pharaohs or kings or gods. So the first person that we need to talk about in the lineup is Ra. So he was Marduk. His real name's Marduk, and he was an Anunnaki, but he changed his name to Ra and took over Egypt. And he has a son, or represented for the sun god. So he was actually a sun god. Very, very. This is where I make a professor of ancient Egypt either look silly or a misinformation person. Okay, this was a TV series called The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egyptians. I watched it a few years back when it was on TV, and I thought, oh my god, they got so many things wrong, this can't be right. So let's have a look and dissect.
Good luck! Shukran kazeelan.
The Great Pyramid of Giza, final resting place of King Khufu.
Okay, wrong. There was no body found there, so she can't be 100% say that that's correct. Also, no bodies were found in any pyramids because no pyramid was a tomb. Tombs are tombs, pyramids are pyramids. So I did some research and I thought, let's see who she was, and that's her there. So then I went and looked at where she was, University of College of London. It turns out, those of you that know my videos, if you don't, go back and watch from video 1 onwards, but the Rockefellers play a big part in misinformation. This is the granite box inside the King's Chamber inside the Great Pyramid. Now I'm just following on from the last video where the woman was saying that the last resting place of Khufu. Now if this was Khufu's last resting place, it would have had, as a sarcophagus or a box, it would have been ornate. It would have had the most wonderful carvings on it. All of them have something on them except for this one, and that's because there was no lid. And why is there no lid? Because it wasn't a sarcophagus, it wasn't a resting place, it was used for something else, which I've mentioned in my previous videos. So this is actually a tomb. Have a look. Compared to what we just saw a second ago, which was an empty room. These are all different tombs, and they're all adorned with drawings, carvings, all sorts of stuff, compared to that. So I think we can safely say, let's meet Thoth. He was an Egyptian deity. Now he was actually an Anunnaki, and we can tell that from the emerald tablets that he wrote, where he talks about standing amongst the little humans. Now we know that the Anunnaki are between 8 to 12 foot tall, so that would make sense that he was an Anunnaki. Plus he lived a lot longer. He also said he lived a lot longer than these humans. Now Thoth was quite important because he was very interested in the afterlife, and so when I go through these videos I'll be talking about him and what he could see, what he wrote down about the afterlife. You'll notice that a lot of these Egyptians have got head masks, and this is because if you watch my other videos you'll see that the Anunnaki gave an eagle mask for a job well done, and they also gave wings for their feet. So this is just a continuation on from the ancient older times with giving away. Okay, I'm going to show you this carving here, and I'll let a professor who worked for a place where the Rockefellers funded, but regardless of that, and then I'll tell you my version of what I think this is compared to her version.
We know that in the very earliest times, their gods resembled familiar things, the world around them, elements of nature and certainly animals. And over time, The animals, their forms, their shapes, their characteristics were distilled down into this sort of divine figure.
Their characteristics distilled down into this divine... She has not a clue. Okay, so, because the problem is she's only learnt, unfortunately badly, from universities, etc., ancient history of Egypt, whereas I have learnt a lot more from all over, and having a wider picture explains a lot more than just her talking about Egypt. So I'll explain why. So she's saying that this basically divine, we waffle what she's just said, as you agree, I'm hoping. So look here, so this is connected to the head. Now the head is really important in Mesopotamia and Sumer as well. So this, if you watch my other videos, would be a ram, and that would be the constellation of this deity, not what she said, which was a load of rubbish. Now I can prove that because Marduk, who was Ra in Egypt, has this sacred bull, which his star sign, as written in the ancient tablets, is a bull. And this would be the sun disc that's on the top of his head, because sun... Ra, Marduk, Ra was the sun god, and just to show you the depiction there of the sun on top of the head. So as you see, if you go back and not just follow one train of thought, if you do what I do and research everything, it makes so much more sense than what she just... I don't even know what she was on about. So there you go. This is why you should be watching me and subscribing. Thanks. This is where I make this professor, Dr. Joan Fletcher, look a bit silly again. Now listen to what she says in her program about ancient Egypt, these carvings.
Some experts even believe these symbols can be vocalized. By turning the simple drawings into sounds, makes this the world's earliest known writing.
Okay, this is... She went to university, really, and she didn't even know about the Sumerian language, which actually came first. Now, this comment here is in Forbes, and they're saying that there may have been a vocal language in Africa, but of course no one's got any proof of that, because you can't... No one had tape recorders. So basically, then they're saying, well, we're not sure if it's Egyptian or Sumerian, but if you read the Sumerian tablets, which are older, and actually talk about how Egypt was built, and stuff before Egypt. My take on how the universe started, as far as I'm aware, no one has come up with this idea, so if I'm right, yay me, get another medal in the office. So the criteria as it stands now is there was a big bang, but no one knows what it was created from. There's no creator behind that actually created it, and we're not really sure why it's expanding. So my theory is, just like CERN here, which is that Hadron Collider, where they're trying to create a God particle, an alien race did the same thing, accidentally created a universe. Now to them it's minuscule, but to us, if we was in that universe, it would be massive. So let's look at the criteria now. Creator of everything, yes, an alien race, accidentally done it. Started with 2 atoms, so now we can say that it was actually started with 2 atoms, and why is it expanding? Is because they've created a mini universe. So what do you think? Let's meet the Egyptian god Nun. Now Nun was supposedly the creator of everything, but obviously we know he's not, so we break that down. He was the person that actually gave life to Egypt. Now his name represents primeval waters. Now he was the father of Ra. Now we all know Ra as Marduk from Mesopotamia, or Anunnaki. Now who's Marduk's father? Enki. And what is Enki god of? Water. So both of these are the same person. Primeval waters, Enki god of water. Now my opinion is, because he's the god of water, this here, the Nile, I think up from Aswan up to probably Giza, is man-made, and when I say man-made, made by the Anunnaki. Now there are some scientists out there that actually do think that some of these, some of this is actually man-made, and the ancient texts for the Sumeria actually talk about them creating rivers. So it kind of makes Devil's Tower, supposedly now a petrified tree stump. So I have a bit of a problem with that, because in order for a tree to grow, you need a tree, another tree to drop the seed. And generally you have more than one tree. Now if you look around here, other than the small ones, That's the only tree around, as you can see there. So the other problem I've got is that is absolutely massively high. And if it's massively high, someone would have had to have gone up and cut that down. Why not cut it down lower? If they've got the technology to get up in the ancient times and cut that down, why not just cut it from the bottom there? That would have been a lot easier. And of course, the most important question, what benefit would there have been to cutting that down? And is there any trees around under the ground that's, was also giant, but just lying under the ground? No one can find any. So I would say no. It's dynasties in Egypt. Now, technically there's 32, but most people really only talk about 30 because one was short-lived and one possibly was a continuation of another one. Now, a dynasty is where a family will rule for a long period of time, either until they have no more heirs or they're overthrown. So some dynasties can last up to 200 years before they end up being changed to a different one. Osiris, I'll get to his underworld goings on a bit later on and who he was, but it's quite important to find out who his sister was. It was Isis, and she was also his wife. Yeah, and they had a son called Horus. Now, as we see here with the Anunnakis, there's a lot of inbreeding going on, just as they did in Greek times as well. So they kept the bloodline as pure as possible. Homosexuality in the ancient times, either with the Anunnaki or Egyptians or Greeks. So I thought I'd better just touch on it. Now, we are aware, if you watched my last videos, that Osiris married his sister and had a kid, Horus. Now, if we look here, Osiris's brother, Set, actually also had a relationship with Horus, supposedly. And obviously he's a male and he's a male. So when we look at the ancient history on how they literally inbreeding was not a problem for them, then I doubt if they would see homosexuality as a problem if they're marrying sisters and uncles are doing things with nephews. So I don't think there would have been a problem with them back then. Elongated skulls in Egypt, there was a lot of them, not just from pharaohs but from priests as well. And this is important because not all of these pharaohs and priests were descendants of the Anunnaki. Some of them were not. So then we look back at ancient Sumerian times when Enki would choose a king or a priest for rulership by manipulating the DNA before the ruler was born. Now that sounds far-fetched, but now we can actually choose the sex. So imagine if we go one step further and not just choose the sex, but choose various other attributes. Now, just look at this dinosaur here with feathers for a moment. And now, a while back, dinosaurs actually managed to find the DNA strand change, listen to this, scales into feathers. So if they can do that, what could the Anunnaki have done? We need to know why the Egyptians married in family and had children that was then rulers, and that stems back from the Sumerian, which we know are the Anunnaki, which really, that's just a team name that was given for those ones that came to Earth, the Elohim. So the Elohim, the way they portray their lineage is if you marry someone, you can have a child with them, and if you was already successor, due to be successor, then your child would be successor. But if your brother, for example, married his half stepsister and had a child, then that child would then take precedence over the other one. So it's a very complicated system, but that's what they had, and that's why there was a lot of inbreeding to try and deliberately keep their lineage going from their side, even though they may be brothers. And there was a lot of fighting. This is the professor from that TV show about ancient Egypt. Now, she's only studied ancient Egypt, as far as I'm aware. So let's have a look at something that she said.
And is dressed in all the same paraphernalia as every king who succeeds him.
He has the tie-on false beard to emphasise his virility and his strength. And this...
Okay, so that's all she said about that. But if you learn a little bit more than just ancient Egypt, you'll realise that the Anunnaki, who were in control of Egypt have these beards. Now, these beards are definitely a status symbol, and the reason that I can definitely say that, not just a status symbol, but for other reasons that we don't actually know. But, for example, Cain and Abel, when Cain killed Abel, he was banished. But as he was banished, the Enki, god Enki, manipulated his DNA so he would not grow a beard. So he was banished beardless. The planet Nibiru is fake with the aliens on, seriously, Anunnaki on a planet, 3,600 year elliptical orbit, and we don't know about it. That's why it's obviously got to be fake, because there's no such thing. However, there is a planet called Sedna, and that's supposedly found in 2003 by NASA, and it's got an elliptical orbit, not of 3,600 years, apparently. It's got an 11,000-year orbit around our sun. So we do have another planet that NASA says. Now let's just imagine NASA knows about Nibiru, knew about it for a very long time, but needed to, shall we say, change the goalposts because they don't want people thinking that there is a planet called Nibiru. So they make up a planet called Sedna, still with the same elliptical orbit, but just a different planet. What do you think? This is the sun god Ra from the TV series SG-1. My opinion, just from the ancient text, he's not the same sort of colour, skin. He would have been pale with blonde hair, and would have been 8 to 12 foot tall. Don't hate me if you've got an issue with the colour skin. I get a lot of people saying Anunnakis were black, and whenever I ask for any kind of written evidence, not off of the internet, but proper texts, ancient texts, no one can ever get back to me. But speaking of discrepancies, I said in a previous video that Set had a relationship with Horus. Now technically that's kind of true, and that's because certain translations down the line, and we're not talking modern translation, we're talking Egyptian translations, kind of got the bits wrong. Now it's quite interesting the fact that Set did actually, you got to listen to the next video. Honestly, it's quite freaky. The ancient Egyptians actually got their own translations wrong down the line. Now, if you look here, you'll see that Ra, which we know was Marduk, in this description here, that he had a couple of kids, and then he had a couple more, they had a couple more kids, and then we get to Set, Osiris, etc. Whereas other translations say that Cyrus and these ones down here were the direct descendants of Ra. So they're kind of all, we're close enough to kind of figure out which one's which. Now, the story goes, the most important story here is to do with Osiris and Set. Now, because they were more than likely the direct descendants of Ra, they were given half of Egypt each. And Set didn't like that. He wanted to take the whole of Egypt over. And that's where the marrying of the brother, sort of half-sisters, etc. So over the many hundreds of years, Set wanted to take out his brother Osiris to rule the whole of Egypt. And eventually he came up with an idea one day, after many sort of skirmishes between the two, that he would have invite all the gods over to his place, and he created this chest, massive box, and he got the height of Osiris spot on, and he made the box spot on height of Osiris. Now, when all the gods came and they're all having a good laugh and a joke, at the end of the meal, Set brings out this box and says, whoever matches the height of this box wins the prize, or whatever it was that they was trying to pretend that there was. So everyone went into this box, and then the very last person was Osiris, and lo and behold, he was the exact same size as the box. Set's people then locked the box up, and follow the next video. Osiris was trapped in the box alive, and Set's henchmen took the box to the ocean and threw it in. Now, Osiris, at this point in time, was married to Isis, which was his sister, and the reason why he married his sister is because if they had a kid, that kid would then be succession to the throne and possibly rule the whole of Egypt instead of it being split into half. Now, what Set didn't know is Isis, the wife, stroke sister, went looking for the box and found it. and then took it back. Now there's a whole new story, so keep watching. It gets even more scary. But you can always tell Osiris because look at his hat. Yeah, it kind of reminds you of someone's hat. And trust me, the Vatican knows a lot more than they let on. They don't have two telescopes. One of them's called Lucifer to look for God. They look up in space for a different reason. Were the Anunnaki reptilians? No, they weren't. This was an idea that David Icke came up with about 20 years ago. And he basically took everything that we know about the Anunnaki, but just added the fact that they're reptilians. There's no record whatsoever of them being reptilians. They do talk about reptiles and snakes, etc., but there's no talk of them being reptilian aliens. And the reason why that's come about is really because of statues like this, which is poorly done, which I don't think was sanctioned by the Anunnaki, compared to the ones that are sanctioned by the Anunnaki. Just look at the quality of that compared to that. Now, if you go back and then believe that the Anunnaki had proper skin and Ra was Marduk, then look, there's no scales on that. And the only reason why he's got dark skin is because he lived in Egypt for hundreds of thousands of years and eventually got tanned, whereas daughters of the Anunnaki have pale skin. So you can see why they would have got suntanned quite clear. I thought I'd just touch on skin colour in ancient Egypt. Now, in my last video I said that I think Ra was suntanned, and that's a logical conclusion, seeing as he was there, at least in the Middle East area, for hundreds of thousands of years. Now, that's a hot area. It's not like England, for example. Now, also here we see that he doesn't have a wife or the mother of these children. So one could have been an Anunnaki, which explains why it's pale, because the Anunnaki original description is pale. And obviously he was an Anunnaki, he was Marduk. So he could have also had relationships with a human, which would have possibly gave a brown child. Now, just to show you how much someone can get suntanned, now this is, you know, you got to remember hundreds of thousands of years, whereas this person here has probably not done hundreds of thousands of years. Well, this one actually does look like they've done hundreds of thousands of years, but that's why I think he had a white child. And Osiris was locked in the box and thrown into the ocean. Osiris found the box, pulled it out, and unfortunately he was already dead. However, Seth found out that Isis now had the sort of coffin, shall we say, and he came and snatched that and chopped up Osiris's body into 14 parts and spread them around Egypt. And Isis then went looking for those parts and actually found those parts, all but one. You can probably guess which part of the man's anatomy she couldn't find. However, this is a long story, she then found that she could still get his essence, and if you know what I'm on about, a man's essence that will be able to produce children. So she artificially inseminated herself to give herself a baby so that the baby would be the heir of Egypt. I'll follow for more. What has the rock got to do with ancient Egypt or the Anunnaki? I'll tell you shortly. So Isis, who was the wife stroke sister of Osiris, who got chopped up by Set, she found most of the pieces except for, shall we say, the pea shooter part. She actually found enough to be able to artificially inseminate herself. And she had a child called Horus. Now, of course, this is all to do with bloodlines and who will rule Egypt after they die. So Seth would have killed Horus, her newborn son. Now, bearing in mind this was a miracle birth, so keep that in mind when we get to Jesus. But he grew up being taught by Osiris's fans in martial arts, but it wasn't really martial arts. It was more wrestling, because as we know, the Anunnaki did the wrestling. And thus we get back to the rock and the rest. Horus's mother, Isis, hid Horus for the longest time and was getting him trained by women, yes, and men of the Osiris's clan, who obviously we know Osiris got killed by Set. So Horus was trained in martial arts, but if you watch my last video, you know it's not technically not the martial arts that we know and love. Now, eventually, Horus was of an age and a skill that he could now say to the Anunnaki gods, I am the rightful heir. Now, at this point, Seth was in charge because he'd murdered Osiris. But Horus actually, in terms of bloodline, was due to be the heir. Now, this obviously caused a lot of problems, and the Anunnaki gods let them carry on as they were for the time being. However, you've got to watch the next video. I'm running out of time. Some really disgusting stuff happened next. You may remember in a previous video I said that Horus and Set may have had a homosexual relationship. Technically, it might not be true. And the reason for that is because there's so many different versions, but one version is that after Horus came out and said that he should be rightful heir to Egypt, and the Anunnaki sort of said, well, you know, sort it out yourselves. Horus and Isis, which was actually Set's mother, decided to have a banquet type thing and invite Set. Now, Set came along, and Set, at this point, decided to throw his seed, if you know what I'm on about, it's a seed that could produce babies, at Horus, in order that if it went on Horus, then he would be underneath Set in terms of, in terms of who would be the rightful heir. But guess what happened next? Set had tried to throw his man seed over Horus. Unfortunately, it didn't work, and Horus caught it, which means he wasn't underneath Set in terms of lineage now, because Set's manly seeds didn't quite work. However, Isis, who was actually Set's sister, Isis had put Horus's seed in the salad that was at the banquet that Set was eating. So that means Set now had inside him the seed of Horus, and that's where we get the homosexuality possibly coming into it, where it's not really the way we thought it was, in the way I say that these ancient texts in Egypt, you've got to read between the lines sometimes. So that now means Horus was rightful heir. When Set found out that he'd eaten the seed of Horus, which must have been a horrible thought, he got angry, and they both had a fight in the sky. Not with wings like that, but the actual description, wait for it, was of a craft that was described just like this, and it had little wings as well coming out. So this would have been one of the craft that was used. Now, the description also said it had two eyes at the front that was firing out a light, which we can assume would be a laser beam of some description. So as the two of them fought in the air, Horus managed to hit Set's ship, and which caused him to lose a man tennis ball, if you want to be polite about it, which then now stopped him from having children himself, Set, anymore. Set was defeated in battle by Horus. Now, what happened next, there's a couple of different versions. One is that Horus took Set to Ra, which was Marduk, all chained up and everything, and said to Ra, what can I do with him? And Ra said, you can actually do whatever you want with him. So Horus was about to kill Set when Isis, which is Set's sister, but Horus's mother, came and freed Set, and Set ran off, and Horus was apparently so angry that he chopped his mother's head off, which is one version of the story. The other version is that Horus, when he lost the battle, moved away to a faraway land with his wife and kids that he already had and couldn't produce any more, and then Horus took over the whole of Egypt. There's a pyramid that not many people know of in Abu Rawash, which is about 5 miles north of Giza. And this is it here. Now, what's fascinating is it's actually on a very, very steep hill before they started to build the pyramid itself, which is, impressive to take blocks up to that height. Now, the mainstream say that it belongs to the son of Khufu. Now, anyone that's watched my videos know that I totally reject the idea that Khufu had the Great Pyramid, and therefore any pyramids relating to his son would be probably out of date. So I don't think that's the case. I think mainstream's just trying to make it fit. Now, what's interesting is this pyramid goes deep into the actual hill that it's standing on, which is quite interesting. But if mainstream say that it was never finished, which is why it looks a bit raggedy, but what if an explosion actually happened and it's took it all off, which is why there's rubble all around? Why are humans here? Well, here's some things that may have changed our future. So the Anunnaki tried to mine for gold on the asteroid belt. Luckily for us, they failed. So that means Earth would have possibly been the next place to look for gold. Alalula came to Earth from Nibiru, and we was lucky again that where he was, he found and scanned for gold. We were also lucky because he saw a snake and was about to pick it up thinking it was a stick, and if he got bit he wouldn't have called the other Anunnaki, who wouldn't have in turn came here and then created modern man from Neanderthal. So all this was very lucky, and of course we're lucky that Enki liked the humans enough to store the mitochondrial DNA in the Noah's Ark along with Noah, so that we could repopulate after the flood. So all these little things that could have just changed our history. I'm going to tell you something you may not know, and it may change the way you